And welcome on into the latest edition of the Blue Horseshoe Podcast. He is George Bremer. I am Ryan Hickey. Remember, subscribe wherever you do get your podcasts, the Blue Horseshoe Pod. Also, watch us right there on YouTube as well. George, I'm really excited for this podcast because we have a lot to break down when it comes to L'Jarius Sneed. Because right now for the Colts, it's a lot of risk versus reward analysis in terms of L'Jarius Sneed. There are a lot of risks out there trading for him, giving him a big time deal. There's also now some medical concerns as well that are popping up. It's a risk. You know what's also a risk that we'll get into? Drafting a corner, signing a veteran corner as well, doing nothing. Everything right now is a risk, and we'll talk about what's the best risk and what's the highest reward right now for the Colts when it comes to corner specifically. We'll get into those arguments and actually discuss, is there actually a chance that L'Jarius Sneed, with all those red flags, could still be the lowest risk and highest reward for the Colts? We'll get to that in 1 second. But, George, we rarely get breaking news on the pod as we are recording this on Wednesday morning. We got some breaking news, and it's the fact that Marvin Harrison Jr. is not working out at his Ohio State Pro Day. I don't know about you, George. If I was a GM and I was picking within the top 14, Cardinals at 4, Raiders at 13, you name it, anyone within the top 14, I mean, I don't know how you draft this guy. You talk about just like, complacency. You feel, could you imagine going into a job interview, George, and then telling the person interviewing you, hey, I'm not going to interview. You just give me the job. I'm not going to tell you why I'm qualified. You just better hand it to me. You talk about entitlement. If I was a team in the top 14, I would not want that entitlement on my team.
Specifically the top 14 too.
Specifically the top 14.
No, the one thing about it that makes me sort of wonder what's going on is just that, you've heard more and more about Malik Neighbors as this process has gone on. And so will there legitimately be a team at the top that says, going Neighbors, I don't know. Like, will they look at all of this in totality and decide to drop them down a couple spots? We will see. I don't know. I think it's going to be an interesting thing to watch, but yeah, I agree 100%. I think all the top 14 teams should move on. It's clearly too big of a risk for them, and they should just find another position or another player to go with. It's too huge of a risk to take him in the top 14.
We don't know his 40 time. We don't know his 3-cone drill. We don't know his hand size. Like, how can you truly sit there with a top 14 pick and say, we can take this guy? I mean, those are the three things you got to check off to get a guy that high. It makes George, he'd be off my board. Throw the little magnet in the garbage.
Don't know the 3-cone shuttle. I mean,
thank you. Another one that's important.
How are you going to find that? Didn't run the gauntlet, which is like the best drill at the combine. I mean, yeah, huge character concerns, obviously, huge unknowns. You can't do it. If you take him before 15, I just don't know what you're doing.
I don't know who his dad is, George, but he's getting bad advice.
And I mean, it's not like he's been around the NFL. He has no idea what he's getting into.
No idea. He has no clue. Playing at Ohio State, playing with some good quarterbacks, playing against good competition, growing up around the league. He has no idea what he's in for, George. So
None.
I just want to throw that out there because I think today we have one name.
Drop like a stone.
Exactly right. Off the board, undraftable. I've never seen a player just tank his stock as much as Marvin Harrison Jr. But if I'm Chris Ballard, I would maybe expect his name to be there at 15.
Maybe a charity pick at 15. Like, okay, feel sorry for this kid. Go ahead and pick him.
It's like there's an old Mike Piazza story that like he was drafted, I think, by the Dodgers because they're doing his like dad's family friend, like a little they're just giving like a little flyer, like a little token of like, all right, we'll do this for you, kind of throwing him a bone sort of thing. Obviously worked out pretty well as a Hall of Famer. Maybe we'll do the same thing here. All right, your dad played here. We'll throw you a bone. Yeah, like I say, here, we'll take you first round, take a little flyer on you. That's, I think, only fair. So throw out the mock drafts of the Colts, Marvin Harrison Jr. 15, and lock it up.
That's a done deal. We can pretty much just close the pod now till the draft day, right? I mean, it's over.
That's it. We have nothing else to discuss. It is over. The Colts first round pick set in stone. You can already basically write the name on the card and hand it to Roger Goodell because there's no way any team above the Colts will be drafting Marvin Harrison Jr. That I'm sure if you go on social media, George, the next few days, there are going to be a lot of takes, a lot of stupidity out there when it comes to this reaction. And hopefully some GMs are listening. Fingers crossed. I doubt it, but hey, one can hope. That is for sure. One can absolutely hope. All right. In all seriousness, George, in reality, let's talk about the Colts here, because one thing that they have not done in free agency, right, is sign a lot of players outside the team, and specifically a corner. They have not added outside of just re-signing Kenny Moore. As we record this pod, Julian Blackmon not re-signed. So their entire secondary, you're making an argument just before we got on here, George, that you could argue, even though Juju Brents and Jalen Jones are a year older now, and Dallas Flowers come back after torn Achilles, would you say right now, George, as we record this on March 20th, the Colts DB room is worse than it was last year?
Yeah, I think objectively, right? I mean, you've subtracted Julian Blackmon, and so far you haven't added anybody to that group. Blackmon could still potentially return, but once you get to the point where you're out and you're visiting other teams, the chances go down. They don't go to zero, but obviously whatever percentage it was before he started taking other visits, it's dropped. And honestly, you don't start taking those visits unless things are going poorly with your own team, right? You're not close with the Colts and then decide, let's see what Buffalo's like in March. That's not the way this works out. So it'll be interesting to see where that leads, because if you go back to the last couple of weeks pod, that's the main thing that we've been talking about. Look, the re-signings in-house were good. All these guys, for the most part, very necessary parts of this team, leaders in the locker room, leaders on the field. We understand that. But the next step is to shore up this secondary a little bit, give that pass rush a little bit more time to get home, and really help this defense try to take another step and be a playoff caliber defense to go with what we think will be a playoff caliber offense. And so, what are they going to do in the defensive backfield is probably the major question on every Colts fan's mind.
Yes, that I agree with. And so with that, now moving forward, let me ask you this, right? Because there's three options for the most part, the Colts. Let me ask you this, in terms of just making a move or not. Do you think between now and week number 1, the Colts, specifically corner, will add a body? Again, we'll talk about where you get that body from in a second, whether it's a draft, making a trade, free agency. Do you expect a corner specifically to be on this roster that right now, as we sit here on March 20th, is not by the time now and week 1 rolls around?
Somewhere along the line, yeah. However it comes, there will be a corner who isn't currently on the roster, right? Whether it's an undrafted free agent or a first-round pick or a trade. Not that those have been talked about recently, but any of those three methods, there will be a corner who is not currently on the roster there. I'll even say when they open training camp.
I like it. I would agree. I don't think that Chris Ballard could or would let this corner room sit the way it is right now going into 2024. I think he will add a body. So with that said, and like you just hinted at, over the weekend, there was some high hopes that maybe L'Jarius Sneed is coming to town. Now, through multiple reports and other things, it sounds like that was nowhere close to happening. And as you sit here, L'Jarius Sneed is still a member of the Chiefs. No trade has been made between him and the Colts. But what I want to do, George, is look at this from Chris Ballard's perspective, right? Because it's a really what this is a risk reward analysis, right? When it comes to adding a corner, whether it's in the draft at 15, whether it's in free agency right now, adding a veteran corner that hasn't been signed, or whether it is pulling the trigger on a trade for someone like L'Jarius Sneed, all three of those options have their own risks and their own rewards. I want to kind of go through this and talk about it. If you're Chris Ballard, we know he is, we'll say, risk averse, right? He is very cautious. He's not someone that just is freewheeling and just kind of makes deals left and right and I don't say willy-nilly, but just throws money around and makes big time swings. He is very, very thoughtful and careful when it comes to making some big time moves. I want to go through this because I would argue, George, right now, of the three options: draft, free agency, trading for L'Jarius Sneed, I think Sneed is the least risky and also the most rewarding. And so I want to kind of, with you and get your thoughts as well, break down each of these options to talk about the risk versus reward. Let's start with L'Jarius Sneed, right? The biggest name right now. Everyone's talking about him for the Colts. And we thought a few hours ago, maybe there's a real chance he was coming to town, and that's not the case. part of the reason why at least a trade has not been done up to this point. And thank you, Carrington Harrison does a great job at Sports 610 out in Kansas City. He's very, tight with that organization, knows a lot about what's going on in the inner workings of that team. He was the one who tweeted out a few different reasons as to why now L'Jarius Sneed has not been traded to the Colts or another team. And part of what he's saying is, right, draft compensation. At least according to him, no team has given the Chiefs an offer that included a second-round pick right now. So that is, at least draft compensation-wise, not been the case. There is concern from other teams that he wants to become the highest paid corner in the NFL right now. Jair Alexander holds that title, $21 million a year. So if you want to say he's got to surpass that, let's just make it easy. $22 million a year is what he's looking for. So 4 years, $88 million, right? Quick math, somewhere in that range is the contract he's looking for. And the medicals, according to Carrington, are concerning for other teams. He had a knee injury he was dealing with a lot of last year, missed practice as well throughout, parts of the season for Kansas City. But with that said, despite missing practice, just only missed one game in 2023. So the knee injury didn't hamper him from getting on the field. And obviously we saw him play. It didn't hamper him whatsoever when it comes to actually playing on the field, considering he didn't allow a touchdown as a nearest defender all season long and had one of the lowest completion percentage rates of any corner all season long. So even though there are concerns, draft compensation, let's just say for argument's sake, you got to give up a second round pick to go get him, making him the highest paid corner, $22 million a year, and some medical concerns. George, I still think all three of those boxes are less risky than signing a free agent or drafting one, just because of it is still a sure thing. And it's one of those where the knee injury, okay, he had a knee injury in 2023. Did he play? Yes. I don't know about you. I'm not that concerned about a knee injury right now when he's still 27 years old. And, I don't think that's going to be a chronic problem where he's all of a sudden you sign him and now he's out for, 10 games next year. I don't think that, to me, when you have a rookie quarterback salary, I don't think $22 million a year for a corner in a room, by the way, that is cheap everywhere else outside of Kenny Moore's contract is going to be a problem. And obviously the playmaking on the field, he comes in right now and is their best corner by far. And you look at the division as well with now you have Calvin Ridley moving teams from the Jaguars to the Titans. Obviously going to try to slow down CJ Stroud, and the Texans have been very aggressive in free agency, trying to really capitalize on year number one of CJ Stroud. You still have Trevor Lawrence, and I think he'll bounce back in 2024 and have a better year. So you still have talented quarterbacks, talented receivers in your division. This gives you the best chance of slowing them down, which gives you the best chance of winning. We'll go through the other options here in a second. But I think for me, at least, George, I think this is the least risky of the options you have in front of you. Here's your thoughts. If you were Chris Ballard, how would you look at, executing a trade like this and bringing someone in that does have concerns, contract-wise, injury-wise, and also draft compensation-wise?
Yeah, I mean, we talked 2 weeks ago about all the reasons why we would make this move and all the things it could do to help the secondary, in particular, bringing in that sort of on-field leader and locker room leader in, as well as everything else he does on it. You're going to increase the talent level in the room. You're going to increase, like you said, he'd immediately be the best corner on the roster. But you're also going to bring in a guy who's got championship experience, who's been there, who's seen how you're going to go. And so those are all the reasons that we said we would make the deal. And I think those still stand. I think from Ballard's standpoint, I don't think any one of those things is disqualifying in and of itself. I think it's the fact that you are dealing with all three of them, that the injury makes you wonder if the $22 million is worth it. And the $22 million makes you want to give less draft capital. So they're all kind of intertwined. And I would add another element in there that I've heard. I don't know, whether or not this is actually out there. And so, we've seen plenty of things that do go out there that are not absolutely true. Bowl rings that you won with this team. You're in a system you understand. You're on a team that has a chance to give you a third Super Bowl ring, and you're going to make $19 million. You're not exactly packing your bags and trying to, hit the road. Some teams, from what I was told, I don't know if the Colts are one of them or not, but some teams around the league uh, think that's why the asking price from him is what it is. That he understands, uh, that will be a tough ask for a lot of people, and sort of that's his tax to leave KC. You want me? You want to get me out of this situation that's just fine for me? Pay me like I'm the number one corner, in NFL history.
The one thing we know about Chris Ballard that's an absolute certainty, he does not want to overpay. We saw with the DeForest Buckner trade, if he thinks it's fair value, first round pick and extending him, he obviously did that and it's worked out to perfection for the Colts. But the one thing Chris Ballard has been really staunch since he got to the Colts in 2017, not overpaying. And I think you're right in a sense that, it's clearly I don't want to say it's an overpay, but you could view it from Chris Ballard's perspective as an overpay to get him off the Chiefs and to your team. With that said, though, let's dive into the other options here, because even if that's the case, even if you are overpaying for a guy that, realistically, again, we talked about before the Pro Bowl voting and kind of roll your eyes. This has been a guy who's not made a Pro Bowl or an All-Pro team. Now, again, I would say the stats, and you look at how he played the last few years and the intangibles he brings, I would say worth $22 million a year. But if you're Chris Ballard, you say, okay, that's a big-time risk. Injury, contract, trading him. Maybe he's not as good as $22 million a year would say. All four of those things are risky. Let's though now look at other options. And if you want to say that's too risky, okay, well then you have to then sell me, right? If that's fair, you got to sell me that drafting a corner or signing a free agent is less risky, right? Like you can't say that drafting a corner is going to be more risky, but we're going to do it and not get a guy like L'Jarius Sneed in town. So let's look at that, George. Let's look at option 2 then. If option 1 is trading for L'Jarius Sneed and Chris Ballard says it's too risky, let's look at corner. I went through the last 10 years of first-round picks because obviously at 50, I feel like the Colts don't make a move. Is that also fair to say? Corner in terms of need goes way up, right? If we're sitting here on draft day and they haven't traded for anyone and they don't sign anyone of substance free agent-wise, it feels like now when we're talking about best available, maybe Brock Bowers, maybe a receiver, Brian Thomas, maybe even an offensive lineman, it feels like corner rockets to number 1 in terms of draft day needs for the Colts and that they would take one at 15. So let's then look at that. I went through the last 10 years, George, of corners drafted in the first round of the draft. 43 corners have been taken in the first round of the last 10 years. When you look at, because it's obviously 2023 draft class, they're a year in, so that's a little tougher. But if you look at guys who have made a Pro Bowl, made an All-Pro team, or have potential to do so, I've calculated just out of those 43, 15 out of 43 corners have either made a Pro Bowl team, an All-Pro team, or have the potential to do so. That is 35%. So I know every year is different, but just from the raw numbers from the last decade, it's a 35% chance, basically, you draft a corner in the first round, he works out. Because I think that's right. Is that fair for the expectation? If you draft a guy in the first round, you're expecting him to be an impact player, be a Pro Bowl or All-Pro caliber player. I don't think you're drafting him just be like, I hope we get him for a second contract or I hope he's okay. I think with the first round pick, you're expecting great things. 35% is basically the hit rate right now at corners in the first round. That's a big time risk, George. That's a big, even though you're picking in theory the first corner off the board when you look at all mock drafts and no one really has a corner going before the Colts, so you get your pick of the litter of who you want. You talk about risk. 35% chance to me is not high enough at pick 15 to justify taking a corner.
I would be interested to see what the overall hit rate is, though, because I feel like that's part of the draft period. And I agree all the way around, but I feel like you're just kind of rolling the dice in the draft, no matter what position you're taking. I feel like we always kind of do this. People throw out the quarterback thing. Should the Bears keep Justin Fields? Because quarterbacks, well, look what just happened. Was it 2021? Those 3 guys or 4 guys that went in the first round, and none of them are with the team that drafted them anymore, except for Trevor Lawrence. That's the first round in general. I think that you just have that. You need to hit on that one. It's the most important pick that you have, and you're rolling the dice when you go out there. You're doing everything you can. You're making the best possible pick you can with the information that you have on hand, but there are things that you will never know until that person gets in your building. And there's nothing you can do about that. You cannot measure their heart and their desire and the things that are going to separate them in this league until they get there and you start to realize, hey, this guy's, like last year, I think one of the things that they got so excited about Anthony Richardson was he came in day one of rookie minicamp and you could see this guy's going to compete every day. He's going to work. He's going to outwork everybody on the field. You don't know that. You hear it. You can research it. You talk to coaches. You talk to everybody around him, but you don't know it till they get in the building. And I think every first round pick, that's the danger that you have. And maybe if you're picking number one overall, you feel pretty good. But just about everywhere else, you're taking a little bit of a chance. Even Marvin Harrison, who's probably the cleanest prospect in this draft, you don't know for sure until you get him in there and you see him in your system and you see how he's going to work. So I think every rookie, that is always going to be something that you are concerned about. And I think that's why you see some teams, and a lot of them talk about it, like you sign needs in free agency so that draft, you can kind of just take the best player available. So that if I'm going to throw a dart at the board anyway, I might as well have it be at a position that I've got somebody already who I know can do the job. That's generally the philosophy. It's not always been Chris Ballard's way, though. I mean, you go back through his 7 years here, almost every year, there's one position that you're sort of scratching your head about. Like, why didn't they do a little bit more there? It's sort of been his MO. And a lot of times when that happens in free agency, he goes and drafts people. Go back to, I think it was 2021. Might have been 2020. They all blend together. When they drafted Pay and Odengbo and did almost nothing else in free agency that year. And here were your two pass rushers, and it didn't work because you had two rookie pass rushers. He's done it at receiver in the past where it was a little too young. He did it last year in the secondary, and it'll be interesting to see if that's the route they go again. I think it's one of the, I don't know if you want to call it blind spots. There's a lot. I think he does a lot more well than he gets credit for around here. People point to the record and, oh, well, he's been here for 7 years and no division titles and one playoff or two playoff appearances and one playoff win, which is all legitimately worthy of criticism. But also the two times that they've had a quarterback who was above average are the two times they made the playoffs. And right now they feel like, we'll see, they feel like they have that guy. My argument on not going the draft route and not, throwing the dart blindfolded at the board, you got to do the best you can to give Anthony Richardson the best team around him as you can. Asking him to go out there and be Superman and overcome, significant deficiencies somewhere else on the field is not a recipe for success. And even if you do believe, as I do, that he has the potential to be a really good player, now's the time, because he's on a rookie deal, to fill in as much of those pieces around him and give him as much of a chance to succeed as you can. And I just don't know that throwing a dart in the first round at corner, even if there's some guys that I think could be really good, there definitely are. I mean, the value might be best at corner at 15. I mean, you just said every corner is probably on the board. And there's a couple of them that really seem to fit what Chris Ballard likes very, very well. In particular, Quinion Mitchell, who's starting to show up in a lot of these mock drafts because he's got a lot of the physical boxes checked that you want to see. I think he ran a 4.33 40 or something ridiculous like that. Big, physical, and also a Senior Bowl star. And we don't discount that because we know Senior Bowl tends to carry a lot of weight. Even if you nail that pick, though, corner to me is another one of those positions that it seems like it more often than not, some have come in. Sauce Gardner did it right off the bat as a rookie, but more often than not, that's a position that takes a year or two, or at least half a year to kind of get up to speed on. And if your goal is to win the division title, as Zaire Franklin said last week, it is, can you afford even half a year of build up to get your starting corner where you need him to be?
No, and that's why, like, it's just like you look at the percentages, it's like a 35% hit rate. Like, I'm with you, like, the draft overall is a crapshoot, right? There's no such thing as a sure thing. I could not agree more with that. So it's like, that's why when you look at the risk of, oh, we're not going to trade for Snead, it's too risky because there are a few red flags we have, but we're going to take one in the draft. Well, I would say to you and argue, George, it is riskier to draft Quinyon Mitchell at 15 than it is to trade and pay L'Jarius Sneed. Because in part, like what we're talking, like, at least with Sneed, sure, you give up, let's just say, a second round pick, right? Let's just, for that argument's sake, you give up round 2. You trade a second round pick, you give him $22 million a year, but you feel pretty like he's a known commodity. You feel pretty good, barring like a catastrophic injury, that he's going to go out there and play really well. Even if he, let's say, quote unquote, drops off from his 2023 performance, what is that? Like allowing 2 touchdowns instead of 0 as the closest defender, allowing 50% completion percentage instead of 48. Like he is a known commodity. So the risk is more of like long term. Oh, we hope he's, lives up to $22 million a year. Oh, we hope, he plays at a high level for 4 years. It's a risk, sure, but you at least know day one what you're getting coming in. You have no idea. Nate Wiggins, Quinyon Mitchell, like a majority of these guys do not pan out and do not pan out to the level you are hoping that they come in and perform at. And even if they play well, I'm with you. Outside like Sauce Gardner, who's like a 1 in a million case per se, you are not getting a Pro Bowl corner day number 1. And getting younger at that position, for me, is a big time risk that I think is riskier with a lower reward than it is to trade for a guy like L'Jarius Sneed. And I think also too, George, in this case, we also have to look at the history of Chris Ballard drafting corners. It's not been very good. Now, the only defense I'll say is he's never drafted a corner in the first round. If he does decide at 15 to draft one, this would be the first time in his Colts tenure he would do that. Everyone else has been a day 2 or day 3 pick. But it's like if you go through the guys he's drafted, and this is only draft, not free agency, undrafted free agency. He is drafted in his time here since 2017. Quincy Wilson, Nate Hairston, Rock Ya-Sin, Isaiah Rodgers, Sean Davis, and then Juju Brents, Darius Rush, Jalen Jones. Darius Rush, by the way, cut before he even made it to week number 1 as a 5th round pick. I mean, the best guy is Isaiah Rodgers, and this is a guy that now is no longer on your team. None of those guys are signed to second contracts. They've all now either on different teams or out of the league completely. He's missed and he's whiffed. I get it's your first time. It would be in the first round, so it's a little bit different. But his history of drafting corners, George, is not good whatsoever. So why make it harder on yourself when, again, sure, the price is high and you got to give up draft compensation? I would think for me, George, it's less of a risk to give up a second round pick and give $22 million to a guy that may have a knee injury, but has 2 Super Bowl rings and had a great 2023 season. I think that's less risky than it is to right now draft a guy 15. How much do you weigh previous corner drafting history?
It should definitely weigh in that. I mean, that, whatever they're doing there is not producing the results they want. Now, like you said, those guys, some of them are day 3 picks. Wasn't something that was happening at the top of the draft, but Rock Ya-Sin was a 2nd rounder. Quincy Wilson was a 2nd rounder. So they're not all day 3 picks.
Right.
It's not all guys at the end that you're just, looking at upside and hoping that you find something. I know that they feel really good about Juju and Jalen Jones, but you don't know yet with them. They've not seen enough, certainly, of Brent's to have any kind of an opinion. But even Jones, you really haven't. It's not had a full year yet, so you can't really make much of a determination about where they're going. It could go either way. And even if they're both hits, it's still a pretty low percentage on the overall group. So, yeah, I think you do have a lot of concerns there. It would be interesting to see what happens at 15 because, again, I think right now the value on the board is at corner. And I don't know how much that plays into their decision making. But I do remember if you go back to the combine, Chris Ballard said a few things that I thought were interesting in this regard. One is that, in free agency, you look at areas that are deep in free agency and you look at the areas that are deep in the draft, and then you sort of make your mind on which direction you're going to go based on that. So that makes me, at the time, a lot of us were reading that as wide receiver, which still could well be the case because it's obviously the deepest position in this draft. But It does make me wonder about the corner being kind of a spot. Remember, he said that he had a position that he knew he wanted to take. So trying to, sleuth that out, value at corner is going to be pretty good at 15. We've already said there's a chance, and a lot of mock drafts are saying it will happen, that every corner will be on the board. And even if not, I think the most I've seen is one. I think Terrion Arnold's the only corner I've seen go before 15 in any of these mock drafts. So we'll see how that plays out. Two, he said somebody asked him, what we've talked about a lot on this pod. As young as you are at corner, would you be reluctant to draft another guy and add to that group, get younger at that spot? And he said, no, that wouldn't bother him. So there's another, okay, put that into the pot. And then the other thing is when we got off the podium and we're in the back there, he said, it's blinking my mind. I had all this in there. I'm getting old. So you gotta bear with me at times. Because there were three elements to all of this that I thought were like, okay, this is interesting. Oh, he said he wants to add competition to that group. He was very quick in saying competition. So it made me wonder, and we talked about this with Sneed from day one. How interested were they? I know they were interested. We know that there was contact at some point early on in the process, but how interested were they and how committed? Because if you're going to do, and I agree with you on the risk 100%, but if you're going to do the draft capital plus the $22 million, you better be committed to the move. And I'm not sure that's the case based on the things that Ballard said back at the combine and based on obviously the actions we've seen so far in free agency.
What last thing I'll say here in terms of like the drafting a corner, like honestly, now that we talk about it, like I don't hate this idea at all, George. If we are in a world where the Colts give up a second round pick for L'Jarius Sneed and pay him the $22 million, honestly, I don't hate the fact that if they want at 15 to take Quinyon Mitchell, take Terrion Arnold, take Nate Wiggins, and like if Chris Ballard wants to truly shore up that position and he spends a second round pick getting a guy that I think is like all pro caliber, Pro Bowl caliber, and basically shuts down one side of the field. And then the other side of the field, you have Juju Brents, you have Jalen Jones, and you have a number 15 overall pick fighting for playing time on that side. I'm in. Like, I don't think like for a position that again is hard to find, that if you do find it, you are setting yourself up really well in the division. I don't think spending in terms of draft capital, we'll say a first and second round pick on that position. I'm here for it, George. I don't think they have to just spend one pick on a corner. If you want to go, you know what, let's get L'Jarius Sneed and let's also draft at 15. Like, I don't think it's the craziest thing, especially too, George. Like, who knows with these contracts, right? But we've seen outside of quarterback, guaranteed money for other positions doesn't really go past year two, maybe year three sometimes. So it's like if you, let's just say, make Sneed the highest paid corner, $22 million a year, let's just say 4 years, $88 million. The odds are most of the guaranteed money is going to be in year one and year two, maybe a little in year three. But really, after 2 years, if things, God forbid, fizzle out, he doesn't play up to the level you want, he's injured, in 2025, 2026, 2027, you could move off of him pretty easily. And still, if you have Juju Brents develop, if you have the pick at 15 develop, you can just slide one of those guys over and still be in a good spot. I don't hate the idea at all. If you're Chris Ballard of double dipping, get a known commodity now, buy some time in a way for your other side of the field to develop and have a competition between three guys versus just drafting another guy and then putting basically, especially if Juju Brents is out there, I mean, for the amount of games he's played, he's essentially a rookie. We'll say he's a half-year NFL vet. Two guys out there that have like 10 games between them experience. I don't feel good about that at all.
It's definitely risky. It's huge risky. I'm always on board on sign one, draft one. If you have a position that you've identified as a need, sign one, draft one is, I think, the way to go. Get that veteran in and then also draft the rookie. I think the big issue here is I don't think Ballard is as concerned about the corners as all the rest of us are. Again, the things that he said at the combine and then the actions so far in free agency and the lack thereof. I think are indicators that he is willing to roll the dice with these young guys. And again, I think that's a much riskier move. I'm with you 100%. I think that's a much bit riskier move than going and making a deal for L'Jarius Sneed, because we've seen them do it before at other positions and it just hasn't worked. They did it at tackle a couple years ago. They have Matt Pryor out there, and they end up, Bernard Ryman ends up coming in and eventually solidifying that, but it took a while to do it. We talked about 2021, I believe it was, with the defensive ends. They went through it. There was a year in there, I think the year that TY was not re-signed, where wide receiver was like that and was really young, and Pittman came on and really showed out, but you felt the lack of depth of that position there. And last year it happened at this very spot, that corner. But I think he feels like, and again, my job isn't to tell you what I would do or what, I think should happen. My job is to tell you what I think they're leaning towards. And all indications are that he feels like they went through the fire last year and they're going to get better for it. I said, you can go back and check the receipt. You want to go to YouTube, or you want to go wherever you listen to your podcast and go back to 2 weeks ago. I said, I thought that they were more interested in safety than they were in corner, and that there was a better chance that there was a safety. And I stand by that. I still think, there's been some safeties visiting. I don't think it's going to necessarily be a major move. We'll see. There's at least one guy out there that's a possibility that could be in Diggs, if that's the way they go. But I think that the plan is to shore up safety a little bit and to let the corners grow and maybe add another one in the draft. Not what I would do, but I think that's the way that they're leaning. We'll see how it plays out. The interesting part to me about that is, if that's the way you're going to go, why isn't Julian Blackmon here?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions for Chris Ballard to answer on that front. I mean, he's been a patient guy, but I'm with you in terms of can't wait too long, especially for both positions, safety and corner, that have a lot of questions right now, not a lot of answers. To put a bow on this, obviously you can tell where I stand. I think it's riskier to draft a corner than it is to make the sign and trade for Sneed. Would you agree, George, that? Which is the bigger risk in your mind when it comes to
100%.
just, okay, so we're in agreement
100%.
there. The bigger risk is to take a corner 15 than it would be to trade and sign L'Jarius Sneed. How about this? What's the bigger risk? Trade and sign L'Jarius Sneed, or try to fill the void at corner with a veteran corner, George? Here are the options right now Chris Ballard has if he wants to go the veteran free agent route to kind of shore up this position. T. Jackson, Adoree Jackson, Stephon Gilmore, Patrick Peterson, Levi Wallace. You can bring back an old friend, Rock Ya-Sin, if you want. Trey Flowers. Any of those names jump off at you where you're like, oh man, that's actually a great move for the Colts if they can sign Levi Wallace or J.C. Jackson?
No, not J.C. Jackson for sure. He had an interesting year last year that I don't think you want any part of, bouncing back and forth and getting suspended and, all those fun things that happened. Yeah, all of that honestly is what keeps leading me back to 15 being the more likely addition, because I just don't think there's a vet out there that really screams to you, hey, get this. Now, will they add somebody eventually? Yeah. But I think it's going to be more in that pitchforks from the Twitter crowd mode than it is in the, start buying your Super Bowl tickets. Now, we'll see. A lot of times I'm wrong. So this is one of those times where, if you're listening, you can hope that I'm wrong. It definitely wouldn't be the first time. But the read that I get right now, I honestly think it may not even be at 15. I think they're going to draft somebody to add competition. They're going to add competition with a vet, that's probably not as high profile a guy, a high profile name. Again, most of the time when we go back through, once we start seeing the moves be made and you get through the draft and everything, Ballard pretty much tells you what he's going to do. And that's why I go back to that combine thing. And he said there, I'm fine adding another young guy. I like what we've got. We're just going to add competition to the room. And that's until he does something other than that. That's the way I expect him to operate.
And I mean, yeah, just looking at these names too, like you talk about the riskiest, signing a free agent corner is easily by far the most, because outside of Stephon Gilmore, all those guys suck. Let's just be honest. They all suck. So you're not, I don't think you're improving the talent on your team by bringing in any of those guys outside of Gilmore. And Gilmore's going to be 34 years old in September. So that's another situation where, okay, maybe for 1 year, like he was a few years ago, is a stopgap. But again, you talk about long-term, you're going to back in the same position you were next year at this time when Gilmore's back in the free agent market, because you're probably going to sign him to a 1 or 2 year deal and you don't have any sort of long-term answer at one or both corner positions. I keep coming back to it, George. Like, we can talk about the red flags for L'Jarius Sneed, and we could talk about the medicals that are concerning. We could talk about his desire to be the highest paid corner in the league, and that, we could argue maybe does sound like an overpay. And Chris Ballard, I think, would rather go in the grave than overpay for anyone in free agency. And the draft competition as well, like all three of them are like, it's not an obvious, like, no brainer sort of trade for him. Like, it makes no sense not to. There are absolute reasons that give you pause on making this trade. But why I wanted to kind of bring up the other paths, George, is while there definitely are risks for trading for Sneed, you look at the other options, drafting a corner at 15 or signing a free agent corner on the market right now. To me, those are way riskier and way more volatile than it would be right now giving all this money for a guy that just won 2 Super Bowls. The risk versus reward, which is part of Ballard's, right? That's his job, essentially. How risky is this guy? What's the upside? What's the ceiling of, if we get him, how good can he be? It all keeps pointing back to, if I'm Chris Ballard, I just don't see how you don't trade for L'Jarius Sneed, because every other option you have is to me a bigger risk and more likely to not work out than it is trading for a known commodity who's 27 years old.
I agree with you. I would absolutely have made the move. We talked about that before on here. I thought there was a lot of good reasons to do it, but I also said I wasn't sure if they would do it. And at this point, I'm fairly sure they won't, just because of the way things have broken down. And
let me ask you
again. Go ahead.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut off you, but I'm curious your thoughts, especially since you are a reporter. You obviously, this is like your job to get info. Obviously, with Saturday, what happened with all the reports, and who knows how close the Colts actually were to trading for Sneed. If you had to put a percentage right now going forward of the chances Sneed, like the Colts do make this trade and actually pull the trigger and it's official, 0 to 100 in terms of likelihood, where would you put that number right now based on what you know?
Less than 10%. I mean, I think it's a really, really long shot.
Real long. Okay.
Because I honestly think, from what I know, and again, things change, things are fluid. That's one thing is absolutely a fact in here. I mean, people still think that, a lot of the reporting that was done on the local side on Jonathan Taylor was wrong. And I could tell you it was 100% dead on. There was major problems there. He was going to be gone. And then he wasn't. And then, Chris Ballard said, I'm going to fix it. And he did. I thought that was really, I remember having a conversation with Ballard shortly after that. And I said, well, you told us you were going to do it, that this is the way this was going to end. And he goes, y'all need to listen to me. So, it was fun. He wasn't trying to take a victory lap, but he could have in that moment. That's the way the NFL is. Things happen generally very quickly. But one thing I remember as far as the Sneed situation goes, years ago, again, I'm old, so we're talking long time ago. Way back when, like 20 odd years ago, I covered a high school prospect here in Anderson during right. He ended up going on to the major leagues. And so I had a good relationship with him because I knew him since he was like 15 years old. And I remember at one point when he was in the majors, he said, think about all these rumors and all these breaking news that you guys get. He said, by the time it gets to the media, it is old news. It's either already happened or it's happening like right now. The deal's agreed to, it's done, or the team's already moved on. And I feel like right now that's the Sneed situation. By the time it got out here, it was a done, we know it wasn't done because he's not here. So the other option is that they've moved on. Now we'll see. I just thought that was one of those things, you hear things sometimes from people who are in a little bit different position than you, and they stick with you. Him telling me that really kind of stuck with me. This idea of, yeah, you know what, we're sort of on a 20-second delay, like for you in radio, make sure there's no swear, you can dump that button. That's sort of us with getting this news from teams, all of us, whether it's Adam Schefter or, whoever it may be out there. So, that's what makes me think. That's why I would say like less than 10%, because just using that barometer, probably the trade has moved on. And like I said, from what I've heard, I really expect Sneed to stay on the Chiefs. But we'll see. These things are fluid, and somebody comes in tomorrow or tonight while we're talking right now, for all we know, there's a GM on the phone right now with Brett Veach saying, I'll give you a second round pick, and then calling Sneed's agent and saying, I'll give you $22 million per year, and boom, that person may get him.
Interesting, which then it goes back to the genesis of these reports. Sounds like it's from, of all places, L'Jarius Sneed's camp, because I don't see why the Colts would put it out there after the fact of kicking the tires, unless Chris Ballard just wants to make it seem like, oh, maybe I'll make a big move. I don't think, though, that benefits him, because a
Just
lot of
wants
Colts,
to anger the fan base.
I was just going to say, I think he would cause more vitriol. There's a lot of pissed off fans, I think rightfully so, after kind of feeling like they were led on, and then actually it's nowhere close. I don't see why that benefits the Chiefs unless they're just trying to drive the price up. But I don't see how, again, that would benefit them. This feels like it's Sneed either trying to get a new contract from the Chiefs or trying to, drum up more interest from other teams of just like, hey, look, teams are not afraid of the medicals, or teams are not afraid to pay me the money I want. Look how the Colts, close the Colts were. They missed out. This could be your opportunity. That's where this feels like this report then came from, George. If you have to kind of trace it back, like you always got to think to your point about news. Why is this coming out, and who does it benefit? Right? Like, who does it benefit?
Always.
With the report out there, the Colts were almost basically essentially was a done deal outside of crossing a few T's and dotting a few I's. Who does that report benefit? Not the Colts. I would say not the Chiefs. Third option, L'Jarius Sneed.
And there's also a lot of different agendas within these communities too. So, the agents always have what they want done, and the teams have what they want done. So, but there's always like other elements of the team too. So that's one of the problems that is legit here. I mean, if I talk to one person in the Colts facility and then say Nate Atkins at the Star talks to another, sometimes we get a different answer because they're not both as privy. And with Ballard, so much of that is tight. Yep. He usually it's him in a very small circle of guys. I mean, Anthony Richardson is the greatest example of that. As we got really close to draft day, it's Anthony Richardson. You heard the local guys saying that within probably like Tuesday of the draft. Up until then, there was no idea, and most of the national media was saying Will Levis because nothing gets out of that office. So I think also that causes other people who want to be sources, not the people talking to them, the people who are trying to be the source out there, to speculate more than you would with maybe another team, because they're not getting as much either. So they're trying to tell you what their read on something is, and it can lead to some bad roads.
The Will Levis point is really good because, I remember last year, it's like, not that we knew a lot from the Colts, but it never felt like the Will Levis reports made any sense just because there's no real connections. The Colts never really that's a good one, because it's like there was a major disconnect between like what we were talking about on the pod and hearing locally versus what was being reported by the Ian Rappaports and the Adam Schefters of the world. That is a good point too, in the sense that Chris Ballard really since the whole Jeff Saturday embarrassment, let's be honest, has really kind of shut the door down and has, kept a very tight inner circle. And I'm sure too, Shane Steichen, as we all know, is, let's just say, down to business. He doesn't like any silliness. He's not here for the rumors. We know, George, he does not live in hypotheticals. That is for sure. Nope. So you have Ballard, you have Steichen, two guys that are strictly business. No need to mess around, no energy or time to be putting things out, putting feelers out there. It is a very close inner circle that I would agree in the sense that if you said 10%, I mean, it seems very low at this point anyway. But it also feels like if a deal would get done, going back to your, point about the baseball player who was in it and kind of was like trying to, tell, the behind the scenes of how breaking news actually happens. This feels like if a Colts trade for Sneed or anyone's going to go down, we're going to find out basically as the contract is being signed. Not before, not all they're seriously into it. That may be exaggerated, but if these sources are true, we will not find out of a deal going down until it basically happens.
Yep. It'll be a done deal. By the time we hear it, you will at least be on a plane to Indy to sign it. It'll be as close to finish as they can. And that's one of the things the Colts learned from the Josh McDaniels debacle.
Oh,
Until the ink is dried, you don't announce it. You look, the team, I don't think, has still announced Joe Flacco. It's out there. He did an interview with somebody. I can't remember who. He was on ESPN or somewhere. So like it's confirmed by every possible, and I have a source that has confirmed it, but it's not. I don't think the official contract has been signed yet. And so the team has not made the announcement. You haven't got that Jim Irsay tweet. You haven't gotten, the push message on your phone that says, we've signed Joe Flacco. They won't do it until, he doesn't have any I's to dots or T's to cross, but they will not do it until I guess that last O is completed. You're not going to see those deals, get announced.
which, like I said, after the Josh McDaniels, can't fault them for being extra safe, which is now, hopefully this is a lesson for you, because it is rumor season out there, right? I mean, so many of these stupid fake wannabe insider Twitter aggregator accounts out there talking about rumors and
fake Schefters.
reports. Fake. Speaking of which, George, I almost for a half second got fooled. Like day one of free agency, there was a fake Schefter that said the Colts have signed Brandon Ayuk. I'm like, oh, let's go. And it took me like I rejoiced for 2 seconds, then realized, hold on. Looked at it. It had the blue check mark and all. So thank you, Elon, for allowing that possibility. And then I realized it was fake. So I got fooled for about 2 seconds. You out there listening, do not get fooled. Remember what George and I just said. There will be no reports of the Colts being close to someone or, getting momentum. The only thing that is going to be legitimate out of the Colts camp when it comes to signing a free agent, trading for a player, drafting a player is going to be when the deal is done. They are not going to leak anything out. They're not going to say, oh, we're close. If you hear that, it is fake news. Don't get fooled. Don't get your hopes up like a lot of us did on Saturday, where all of a sudden we started looking at, blue 38 jerseys and starting getting ready to welcome Sneed to town. Don't have that happen again.
Yeah, I don't need to deal with that again. And, look, like I said, you never know the way things go in the NFL. At some point, Kansas City could just decide this isn't going to work financially. I think they had it planned in. I don't think they would have tagged him if they didn't have a plan to keep him. But you never know what's going to happen. Or Kansas City may see somebody else become available and say, we've got to go get him. And now the price drops because now you need to unload him. There's always things that happen. That's where Ballard's patience is good and bad for him. At times, it really goes the wrong way. And you end up thinking, man, he waited, never got anything done or got a little teeny deal done. At other times, he waits and waits and waits, and they're the last team with money when something happens, and they're able to get something like Stephon Gilmore is the perfect example. And that was late in the game when he was able to sign and come here the last time. Now, I think they'd have a really tough sell job. I'll just say that to bring him back, not because he doesn't like the city or anything else, but he was here for the worst year that I've been on the beat. I mean, I'll say that 2022. I've been around this team since Andrew Luck was drafted in 2012 on a pretty much a daily basis. 2022 was the worst of all those years. Gonna be tough to probably sell Gilly on what might be the last year of his career, coming back and taking a chance to relive that. Even though you can tell him everything has changed since then, and it has. If I was in his shoes, I don't know if I would make that move.
I would agree. That I cannot argue with. That's a very, very tough sell to say the least. So you hear George and I's thoughts on risk versus reward. I'm curious your thoughts here. Plenty of ways to reach us. At GM Bremer is George on Twitter. At Ryan_Hickey and the number 3 is where you can find me on Twitter. Comment on YouTube if you're watching our show. Appreciate you. Make sure you like, subscribe to the Blue Horseshoe Podcast on YouTube. But in the comment section, I'm curious your thoughts here. It feels like the Colts at some point this offseason are going to add a corner. The question is who and from, where, in the sense of, is it going to be in free agency? Is it going to be from the draft? Or is it going to be a trade like L'Jarius Sneed? Even though it feels like a long shot, we won't exactly close the door, slam shut on that not happening. Which is the biggest risk, do you think, in your mind? Which is the least risky of the 3 options? Love to hear your thoughts. George and I both feel like, at least in terms of the least amount of risk, your best bet is trading for Sneed, despite the red flags that have popped up. If you disagree, tell us which one you want to, which avenue you rather pursue. Very curious to hear your thoughts. Again, Blue Horseshoe Podcast on Twitter, Blue Horseshoe Podcast on YouTube. Let's get that correct. Holy cow. GM Bremer on Twitter, Ryan_Hickey and the number 3 on Twitter, and the Blue Horseshoe Pod at gmail.com. Email us. We are there on email. I'm sorry. I see. I already screwed it up. It's just Blue Horseshoe Pod at gmail.com. Drop the V. We're not Ohio State. Blue
Nope.
Horseshoe Pod at gmail.com is where you can email us your answer as well. Really curious to hear your thoughts and feedback on this, because it's a big one, George, right? This is obviously the biggest topic right now that Chris Ballard has to wrestle with. And honestly, a big time decision that outside of Anthony Richardson's development and play in 2024, you could argue the next biggest thing that's going to impact winning or losing in 2024 and beyond is going to be how they address the corner position, how that player or players play next year. So this is a big one.
It's huge. There's no question about it, because again, you saw what it did to last season. I'm not saying it was the sole purpose for why the Colts didn't make the playoffs, but they made a choice to go young there, and Ballard has been very open about that. He's been very just an open book as far as what they did last year in the secondary. They made a decision to go young and take their lumps there, and hoping that would pay off down the line. And, the Cleveland game, the Saints game, there were a couple games where it really showed up. It wasn't all year long. It wasn't as bad as sometimes it's made out to be, but there were a couple games where it showed up in a major way and cost this team a chance of victory. So I don't think you can take that chance again, but we'll see. And maybe the whole point is, hey, went through this with the idea of bearing the fruit. Now we'll see if the fruit, actually does come to, bear in this season. I think that is the most riskiest of these routes, though. I mean, we were just talking about, I think that is the number one, even more than signing a veteran who might not be a major impact guy. You never know. I mean, I go back to Mike Adams when he signed here as a safety, and everybody's like, well, he's washed. And it ended up being maybe Ryan Grigson's best free agent addition that he was here. I mean, came in and played really well and was a leader. You never really know. So we'll see how that works out. But I do think of all the past, that's the riskiest. And right now, that's the one I would be most likely that they're going to take.
All eyes are going to be on Chris Ballard as he continues to navigate both the corner market, also the safety market as well. No movement there. Again, as we are recording this on March 20th, Julian Blackmon has not been signed. He's also not signed anywhere else. So obviously a return is still possible. But right now, the attention as we get closer to the draft, just about 5 weeks away from round 1 of the NFL draft starting. All eyes now, George, as the Michael Pittman Jr. has been resigned. Obviously, Jonathan Taylor last year, that's been taken care of. Anthony Richardson progressing well. All eyes turn to the defense. All eyes turn to the secondary. How and who will be brought in to address this position? It's a big, big question we will continue to stay on top of. So again, appreciate you listening. Want to hear your feedback in terms of how you would address the corner position now for 2024. So let us know again on YouTube in the comment section. Email us, bluehorseshoepod@gmail.com. GM Bremer is where you can tweet George. Ryan_Hickey and the number 3 is where you can tweet me. Give us your answers as well. Love to hear your feedback. On that note, assuming, George, we don't get any breaking news and we don't get any real breaking news, we'll talk to you next Wednesday. So have a great rest of your week. Have a tremendous weekend. Talk to you next Wednesday right here on the Blue Horseshoe Pod.